So I would like to welcome Cristiano, Casalini, and Claude Pavur. We'll be speaking today about your book, Jesuit Pedagogy, 1540 to 1616, A Reader. And I'd like to just congratulate you on the publication of your book, and thank you both for taking a few minutes to speak with me about it. Your book was published by the Institute of Jesuit Sources, and although it's now headquartered here at BC, I'm guessing that some people in our audience won't be familiar with the Institute. What can you tell us about it?
Yes, briefly, the Institute is a publishing unit of the Society of Jesuits, which was begun about 55 years ago by Father George Gantz. His original insight was, we need something to put into English the sources for the society and its tradition and its spirituality, and especially the constitutions. He said, well, we're having fewer and fewer people who can handle the Latin of the original, and that was his insight. It moved to Boston College only in 2014, and now it is part of a bigger institute, the Institute for Advanced Jesuit Studies. But we're still a book publishing unit.
Generally speaking, why is pedagogy such an important part of the Jesuit mission?
Well, that's a very rich question. The best way to say it is that pedagogy, in a way, is the Jesuit mission, because the formula of the Institute, which was one of the earliest documents put together, defining our mission and our identity, makes it clear that we are established to help souls progress in their knowledge of Christian doctrine, in faith and Christian doctrine. So you need teaching. If you have doctrine, you're doing teaching, you're communicating teaching. You have to have the teaching-learning situation. And secondly, we are founded to defend and propagate the Christian faith. Again, defense and propagation, you have to be teaching, and there has to be a learning going on. So Ignatius right away knew we want people in the society who know what they're doing, who know how to speak, who know the concepts involved, who understand what they are saying, and therefore education was a prerequisite. So he himself had to worry about pedagogy of the original Jesuits coming into the society, but also the order's work was a teaching-learning work.
Moreover, despite the fact that the very first educational institution of the Jesuit was the College of Messina, founded in 1548, we have evidence of the Jesuit commitment to education since from the very beginning, 1540, when Ignatius sent the first Jesuits information in Paris to a college owned and governed by the Society of Jesus.
Yes, a residential college originally. But of course, even these residential colleges had teaching and learning going on within them, because there would be older students who would help younger students. And so even these residential colleges in the first years of the society did have a teaching educational component.
The Society of Jesus only received official approval as a religious order in 1540, and your book explores Jesuit pedagogy from that point up until 1616. Why limit yourself only to those first 76 years?
Well, the basic reason is that we relied on the 7 volumes of documents edited by Father Lukács, who was the greatest archivist, Jesuit archivist in Rome, and collected 7 volumes of educational documents connected to the editing process of the Ratio Studiorum. So the Ratio Studiorum, which is one of the most important documents, educational documents for Western society, and most of all of early modern period, is known to be published in its final version in 1599. Despite this fact, actually, the general of the order, Claudio Acquaviva, continued to work on education even later, and finally, the next congregation in 1615 and 1616 decided to make some minor changes to the Ratio Studiorum. So actually, the very final version of the Ratio Studiorum was exactly in 1616, and Father Lukács documents end exactly at that date.
Yes, and the Ratio Studiorum is the classic expression of the full flowering of the idea of Jesuit education. It had been contributed to through many institutions and many programs all along, but it was that was the fullest expression, and it didn't change. In fact, it was never replaced fully since the 1616 version.
You served as co-editors of the book, and I'm interested in hearing a bit of the backstory of the book. For example, how did it come about? What were the sources that you drew upon? And what were your respective roles?
Yeah, well, this book was born, the original idea of this book originated in the cafeteria at Stokes Hall, where Robert Merricks, who's the editor of Jesuit Sources, proposed me last year to work on this reader. He said there is a guy, a Latinist coming from St. Louis, and he could be a good fit for you to work with him and collect some documents. Where I just outlined a selection of Lukács's documents, and then when Claude, who is way more than a Latinist, is a great scholar, came here, we started to discuss the structure of the book, and then we divided the work in the major work, which was the translation of these documents in the original Latin text. Were up to Claude, and while the Italian and the Spanish ones were up to me. But then we crossed the documents and we worked to each other's work, and we had actually a lot of shared work during the summer, during the editing process of the book. Moreover, we actually shared the commenting work on these documents. And of course, we outlined together the introduction, which was actually another very difficult challenge for us.
Yes, it was so rich. Also, I'd like to say that one sign of the fit between Cristiano and myself was that we began in January of 2015 and we finished at the end of January 2016. A rather full volume, I would say, with many details and issues to talk about, and great bibliography, extensive bibliography and notes. So I think that speaks to the fact that we worked very well together.
Does your book fill a scholarly void vis-a-vis the study of Jesuit pedagogy? And if so, why was this particular book necessary?
I would say yes, definitely. There is nothing like it in English, certainly. Maybe not in any language. Up till now, the scholars who were interested in this area of the history of early Jesuit pedagogy would have the languages, including Latin. Now it's harder and harder to find people with the requisite linguistic skills. So there is nothing there. The other scholars would go to the original sources in the Monumenta Historica, the critical edition of these documents. We have made a selection that will help scholars get a particular sense of what is there and the range of what is there, the scope of what is there. So I think it will fulfill a great gap that has been there for a long time.
Yeah, the main goal of this book is actually to show people that the Jesuit commitment to thinking about educational practice was far more than the dry rules of the Ratio Studiorum. There is a deep work of thinking on pedagogy and on spiritual, ethical person formation, which these documents show. And we think that thanks to this book, the broader public can get this sense.
Yes, and if I might add, any Jesuit institution involved in education should have some access or can make some use of these documents. As you know, Vatican II told us to go back to the sources and then update them. You can't just do the updating. You have to go back to the sources and know what they are. So people have been maybe a little loose on that part of it because it required these languages and the specialized books. So we think that even apostolically and in terms of the mission, this will make a great contribution.
How do you envision your book being used by scholars and students, and how might they profit from it?
The first use that scholars can make of this book is, of course, getting a sense of the change that the Jesuits made in the 16th century education. So they blended medieval traditions in educational institutions, but in such a way as to provide a very new, I should say, modern way of educating youth that was unmatched at that time. So scholars can have this sense thanks to our book. And the same goes for students whose education today, even today, is still shaped by these ancient insights of the Jesuits.
Yes, yes. I think the main thing will be that we now have an easy way to see a vision that is early modern. It is not post-Germanic Wissenschaft, research-oriented education at the higher levels, but it is this rooted, long-term interest of the Church and medieval society coming to a full flower in a new way because of the developments in scholasticism and the new interest in humanism. So anyone interested in early modernity will get a better self-portrait, as it were, of the European society in which many of us are based.
Assuming that some of your readers will be newcomers to the study of Jesuit pedagogy, what does your book have to offer them?
Basically, the newcomer will have a way of getting, an easy way of getting into the details and the scope and the range, as I said before. This has not been so easy up till now. Our book is extremely accessible. It's not advanced metaphysical thinking. It is not technical. It is the day-to-day labor of creating an education that makes a difference in people's lives and contributes to the common good. So even a totally naive reader can get a great deal out of the vision that is expressed in these pieces.
Yes, and you get also a sense of what exactly Jesuit education was at the beginning.
Was this venture a learning experience for both of you? And if so, how?
Of course, it was a great trip for us in the early Jesuit mindset. We learned mostly how different they were in their character. And when you work on transcribing and translating a text, you have a deep insight of how a man was, how was his mentality, and so there is such an interesting scenario with these early Jesuits, where usually the Society of Jesus was depicted as monolithic army of the Pope, but thanks to these documents, you can see how much conflict and different point of views there were among them, and you can see the real people through these documents, and this was very highly meaningful for us to work on them.
Yes, I learned how many people were involved, how passionate they were, how devoted to the task and how expressive they were of this. You can tell reading Clavius's tracts on mathematics, how we must do mathematics better, and you have these options. This is the way to do it. If you don't want to go the full route, you can take this way. So you see all of these things. But I think for me it was also a learning experience because I began to have a sense of a whole other level of Jesuit spirituality. You know, when we talk about Jesuit spirituality, people think right away, the exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola. I realize now that a Jesuit spirituality equally profound, if not more, is the spirituality of Docta Pietas, because Ignatius himself knew that he needed learning to accomplish the mission he wanted to undertake and felt he was given by God. He needed learning. He went for learning right after his trip to the Holy Land, and it remained a constant. And really, most of the Jesuits, they spend time on the exercises and they pray every day, but they also devote most of their lives to the daily labors of teaching. And not just any teaching, it has to be teaching according to pietas, or deep devotion and loyalty before God. So I think this is a profound insight that I did not quite have at the beginning. I did not have this at the beginning, that this is really another spirituality. You might not call it Ignatian so much as Jesuit. But I would like to highlight the phrase Docta Pietas as one of the big insights that came to me during this project.
So this is the first volume of an intended series that's titled Sources for the History of Jesuit Pedagogy. What's coming down the road in that series, and will both of you be involved?
The series has another book which is going to be published, not by us in this case, but we actually had recently discussed, thanks to the success of this book from the very beginning, we discussed a new project which is keeping on collecting documents about Jesuit education and possibly writing down 3 more books from the 1616 till
The
suppression of Jesus for the first volume, and then from the restoration of the Society of Jesus till the Vatican II, and maybe another one for contemporary Jesuit education. And so our challenge will be to challenge ourselves in this way. We should provide evidence of how Jesuit education changed throughout the centuries without changing its core values, which are outlined in these documents.
Yes, we'll have maybe it will be 4 volumes. The volume we're talking about being volume 1, then going to 1773, and then the suppression, and then from 1814 maybe to Vatican II, or maybe to 1914, then doing contemporary. And as Cristiano says, we will see how even with the classic idea, the society was able to adapt its teaching and educational structures to modernity, the Enlightenment, as those unfolded. So this will be very, very intriguing. We will learn new things, and how Jesuits were handling intellectual challenges all the time. They were rooted in medieval scholasticism and humanism, but they were not untouched by all the cultural developments that followed.
And will both of you be involved?
So yes, we discussed this project of making other 3 volumes on Jesuit education, and of course we discussed it as a team. We became actually a team in Jesuit education, and I think that this couple is going to work many years, still many years together.
Yes.
So stick around.
And we're now at our final question. As scholars, how do both of you value research libraries?
Well, the, one of the main reasons I'm here is because of the Jesuitical collection at Burns Library. So BC has a great heritage of ancient books and books about Jesuit education and Jesuit history, and this is definitely amazing. This allowed people, researchers like me and Claude, to do the best we can in doing our job. And then, actually, Burns Library was also important for this book because they started to provide images for the book. And they are still working in order to get a database of ancient images, engravings, fantastic pictures that you can find in ancient books, which are collected and now owned by Burns Library. So I think that this is fantastic.
Yes, and I will just second that and say that I don't think this book could have come together, certainly not in the time span it did, without the resources of the research libraries here. I use the Theology and Ministry Library quite a bit, and the access to periodicals that are there, and maybe not all scanned on the web, but they are there, and we can easily copy those pages and use them in further research, writing notes, identifying figures. That was invaluable. So the periodicals that are current, but also the stored periodicals, were crucial to this.